Namaskar to one and all. So we have our today's session on the Sitara seminar series, and with us we have Dr. Vijendra Nath Guru from the Millet Foundation. And a brief about himself is he is an independent technology developer, sustainable food systems advocate, and activist focused on sustainable solutions, mostly in the agriculture and allied sectors. Since 2013, he has been studying, understanding, and working towards improving millet cultivation practices, millet processing, and cooking with millets. Currently, he is working on developing improvements to machines to enable millet processing at a small scale with reduced drudgery and enhanced output. He is also a technical consultant with social enterprises and non-profits, redesigning and designing their millet processing setups and designing their millet programs. So, on behalf of the Sitara family, I welcome you, sir. And
Thank
now
you.
we shall proceed towards the presentation.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Jadhav and the faculty of Sitara for inviting me for this webinar. Just a soft start. Sitara is very close to Setaria, which is Setaria italica for foxtail millet. So whenever I think of the botanical name for foxtail millet, I remember your institution. Or so yeah, so very happy to be presenting about millets and some of the work that I do on millets. It's a very brief presentation that I've prepared because I typically feel there's more to discuss than to present in some of these things. Okay, I shall page down. Yeah, yes, page down is working. Okay, so I have slide numbers in case you have any questions and you want to come back to that slide, please just make a note of the slide number. It's in the bottom right corner. And broadly speaking, I'll be answering some questions or positing some propositions which I feel are very important, and I cannot say it's a theory or it's a hypothesis, but it's pretty much propositions and backed by experience and data, but haven't really built it into anything formal and detailed yet. So why do we need nutritious cereals? Why the search? I'll just dwell on that as to why I chose this topic. And then what are millets? And then what is the nutritious aspects about millets? Why, what makes them nutritious? And then also, of course, looking at the supply chain and what are the necessary changes that we need to make in order to really get the nutritious benefits that we talk and seek from millets. And then, of course, do we just stop at that, or do we look at it in terms of a food system? And primarily because I work on sustainable food systems, and millets are not by accident, they are very much by design. When we look at sustainable food systems, we invariably have to look at rain-fed farms and therefore millets and all that. So what are the changes we need in our food system so that we can move towards sustainability? And of course, I'll end with some summary and conclusions. I hope the 20 slides will fly by with adequate time for questions and of course answers. So why the search? Why the search for nutritious cereals? One thing is that if we take human Homo sapien existence, anthropological existence on this planet, of late we have moved to a very carbohydrate rich diets, and surprisingly, I mean, earlier days this was not the case, but now with a lot of the welfare schemes and various other, I should say, misguided welfare schemes. The problem is not with welfare schemes, but the misguided welfare schemes. We have extremely carbohydrate-rich diet that is promoted, especially among the oppressed and the vulnerable communities. So what was earlier lifestyle diseases, earlier as in 10, 20 years ago, were identified as lifestyle diseases, are today being seen among individuals who are really not in the same socioeconomic bracket. So of course, not just these two, we also are confronted with the whole climate change and the water issues, the water crisis, which is not a small thing. And needless to say, the whole the chemical load on the soil, on the environment, and on our own bodies and food systems. So various reasons that have brought us to look for nutritious millets, better options than paddy and wheat, and that's what millets. I mean, that's the bill that millets fit. And when we look at millets, what are millets is something that we should understand, because it's not like paddy, which is basically Oriza, what is it? Oriza sativa, something like that. And Millets are not that. Millets are multiple species. They're mostly dryland rain-fed crops, and they all belong to the grass family, of course. But so do wheat, paddy, barley, oats. All these are Poaceae, where we find our carbohydrates. So the thing that clubs the millets together is a very subjective, loosely knit thing. In India, we associate what were called as the coarse grains. हिंदी में मोटे अनाज. Yeah, so in that sense, it's very prejudiced in terms of wheat and paddy were the fine grains, and millets were the coarse grains. So yeah, so why were they coarse grains? Because they grow in poor soils, so it's like not the food of the refined. It's as in refined as in people with resources. It's mostly the food of the poor. Uh, and of course, why millets now in this scenario? They have a very low susceptibility to pests, which results in the natural thing that very low pesticide load, very low chemical load on the crop. In fact, zero pesticide load. There is some chemical load among farmers who want to use chemical fertilizers in order to improve their yields. And of course, the climate change resilience is one of the big things with regard to millets, because as you will see, I'll come to this a little later. And of course, farm and farmer friendly, even that I'll be talking about a little more later on. So what are the characteristics of millets? The first thing is that they are quite small. So this is, I think, what you see in the photograph here is what I use the most when I'm working with millets, which is basically a lens, which it's just a 10x, I think it's called as a read and pick glass, which is used by textile engineers in order to identify the thread count. I just use it to see my millet grains better. And of course, whenever I'm photographing, I want to scale so that I can get my images right. So they're really small grains. There are two types of grains, one set with a husk and another set without a husk. So the husk grains, the husk is non-silicaceous. I don't know if silicaceous is the right word, but there's no silica in the husk, unlike paddy. And then we typically eat those grains in the rice form. We can use it in the rava and the flour and various other forms, brokens and farina and stuff like that, but mostly in its rice form. We also have another set of grains which we put as the naked grains. They do not have a husk, but they do have a bloom, and their epicarp is fairly thick. I'm not sure if I'm using the botanically correct names, but pardon me if I have it off by a little bit. The flour form is what we typically use the naked grains as, and this whole set of grains is what we call millets. Now, why are they nutritious? But before we go to why they are nutritious, let's just give a glance through this table. I hope, because all of us are seeing on our screens, the table is visible. Otherwise, the PDF is going to be shared, so please zoom in and have a look at it. But what I wanted to share is that, okay, but before that, so the rows, along the rows are the different grains, starting from foxtail, little kodo, proso, so on. And at the bottom are 3 grains, paddy, wheat, and quinoa. And then along the columns, we have different nutritional components, and starting with proteins, carbs, fat, so on. Now, what I wanted to highlight with this table was that the greens are the high spots, or highlights of each nutritional component. It's not just one grain that is good. The greens are almost fairly evenly distributed, or randomly distributed almost across the table. And And that's what I would like to underline, that it's not just one grain when we talk of millets, it's multiple grains, each with its own unique bouquet of nutrition, flavor, taste, cooking quality, various things. So, but what makes them nutritious is that these grains are food for us, but they're seeds for the plants. And as I mentioned earlier, these grains or these crops are extremely climate resilient. They grow with in very poor soils as well, and with very little water. So what that means is that there has been a survival, the whole evolution has worked on these, and the resilient ones have survived. But not just that, I also mentioned earlier about the fact that millets have been the food of the poor. And if any of you who's worked with these communities would recognize that it's not that they do not exercise their faculties. Whenever they can, they do exercise their faculties. And in the cultivation of millets, we see that resilience has been a top priority when they have domesticated these seeds, when they have saved their seeds. They don't necessarily go for the biggest grains, they don't go for the biggest plants, the biggest or the thickest stems. They go for resilience in terms of selections, which is not true with paddy and wheat. And after I started working with millets, I actually not even after I started working with millets, after I started working with tribal communities on millets and other crops, I recognized that even paddy and wheat, well, not as much wheat but more like paddy, um, we have varieties which are dryland crops, which are even today broadcast into a field with 20, 30 other different crops. So, so resilience has been a top priority in domestication or in development of the seeds, millet seeds, by various farmers, scientists, farmers. And what is also important is that millets, as they were processed till the recent past, had an eye on the nutritional quality. What do I mean by that? What I mean is that the grain, okay, so when I say processing millets, I mean those husked grains, which is basically foxtail, little, kodo, proso, barnyard, brown top millets. And there are a bunch of other ones which are not as prevalent or as easily available and fairly regional. So, but these 6 are the ones that are commonly available in the market as well as in the farms. So these have a husk and an intermediate bran layer, the inner rice kernel, and of course the germ from which we have the grain sprouting and forming a plant. So this is the approximate grain structure, and in the process of making it ready for our consumption, what we need to do is take off the husk and retain the grain with its bran. And that's the challenge, because the bran, even though it's rich in fibers, minerals, and fatty acids, or probably because it's rich in these things, it's thin and fragile. And I won't go into why it is, or how do we understand thin and fragile bran. In case somebody is curious, let's discuss that during the Q&A. But suffice it to say that the bran comes off very easily. And as you can imagine, taking off the husk while retaining the bran can be a challenge, because the husk is a little hard and doesn't come off very easily. So what do we need to change, and how do we make sure that this nutrition comes through to the consumer? How do we convey the nutrition to the consumer? So the first thing that we need to recognize is that we need to nurture the resilience that farmers over a few millennia, if not longer, have nurtured in these grains, which has not been the case with paddy. So we have to emphasize on the fact that these are dryland crops, and rain-fed farming has to be the way we take this forward. We also need to look at the fact that rain-fed farms have the pitfalls when it comes to the current food systems. There are huge variations that are possible within the same variety, the cultivar, based on the soil, the agroecological conditions, based on the cultural practices of the farmer. So a whole bunch of things. So these variations should be accommodated in the rest of our supply chain. Right now, they are not. And of course, there will always be fluctuations in supply. In fact, some of the farmers, that communities that we work with, they are happy if they get a good crop once in 3 years. And in a community that I met recently, they're like, 4-5 साल में एक बार ठीक फसल आ गया तो काफी है. Um, that's not what most other supply chains are comfortable with. They would want every crop to be a success, and not just a success, but a success that beats the previous one. So there are a whole bunch of things that we need to work on. So in terms of our supply chain. And of course, like I was saying, processing is extremely critical. Of late, processing has been such that it's not just agnostic, it's actually anti-nutritive, as in they are looking to take that off, primarily because when you retain the brand, you invite pests. We humans are the latecomers when it comes to millets. Millets have been, have evolved or co-evolved, or quite a few species have co-evolved with millets. And we are in some sense the latecomers to the party, but we are also the smarter ones. Not I, but a lot of us think we are the smarter ones. But anybody who's processed grains and has tried to not use chemicals to manage pests knows who is smarter. So yeah, so that's another thing. And of course, whenever we are retaining the brand, like I mentioned earlier, it contains a good amount of fatty acids, and these, when the brand gets damaged, these get oxidized. It doesn't need to get damaged, just exposure is enough, but damage accelerates the process of oxidation. So rancidity is a big issue, which means that we should be looking at shorter supply chains. Now, just going beyond just the millets, how would we look at it in terms of a sustainable food systems? Because it's not enough to just have sustainably grown or consumed millets. We have to go beyond that, as in today's, it's 2020, and we can't really say, hey, if I'm just eating organic, I'm fine. Or if I'm getting it from a farmer that I know, I'm good. I've done my part in the food system. So we really need to look at production side issues. There are huge issues with production. We have not just with the Green Revolution, but even before that, the whole idea of commodifying agricultural produce is beneficial. That's how economies have grown. Human society has progressed, developed, whatever word we want to use. But what we have to recognize is that agrobiodiversity has been eroding consistently since humans have discovered agriculture, and especially quote unquote civilized societies. It's only a few societies here and there, communities here and there, that have been able to sustain their food system, sustain their production, and those are the tribal communities which we are uprooting and displacing and plundering even to this day. So production, there's a whole bunch of things that we need to look at. Even with millets, almost everyone wants to know how they can maximize. So it's typically monocrop, which a lot of us are vocally against, but in many cases we have to resign and say, hey, I want to bring these grains to the market, so I have to lump it and make this compromise. But as a society, as policy, we really should not be making that compromise. There should be incentives to change our production systems. But as I mentioned, it's not just production, processing. I didn't touch upon this earlier, but I'll just take a minute on this now. The reason that taking off the brand, and this is true about paddy as well, by the way. Paddy rice, many among the participants here would recognize and remember, till about 20 years ago, even 10 years ago for that, no, actually 20 years ago, we would pick the unhulled grains from our rice. We would pick out pebbles before we cooked our rice, the paddy rice. But today, nobody does that. The reason is that we do not have that kind of rice that we ate 20 years ago. Not because of the varieties, but because of the way these grains are processed. They are either polished or what is that, silky finish? I call them bleached. They're all bleached so that the colorful bran is taken off and you're left with the white, which apparently is very famous and everyone wants it. So even in terms of processing and trade, there are a whole bunch of issues that we need to address. This bleaching process, the process of removing of the bran is easy because I just go back to that slide. What happens is that we invariably have the advantage of, if you want to retain a fragile layer within a hard layer, invariably your costs are going to go up. Think of it as demolishing a building, but trying to retain a wall in that building. Just go to any demolishing agent and they will tell you your costs are going to skyrocket because you want to retain this particular wall. But hey, that's the price we have to pay for the nutrition, because otherwise, if we continue processing the way we are processing our paddy rice, millets are marginally better than paddy rice. It's primarily the fibers, the minerals, and the fatty acids that give us a lot of nutritive benefits. And we really need to look at our processing and see how we can change the way we work. And of course, the trade naturally, because we are talking of shorter supply chains and other things. Now, when it comes to consumption, there are a whole bunch of things. I'll come to that in a little bit. Now, when it comes to sustainability, we really need to think of sustainability not just in terms of sustainable production, but as sustainability, we define it in nature, which is basically the nutrient loop. Are we really closing the nutrient loop? And unfortunately, spatially and temporally, we are way off from closing the nutrient loop as of now. I just realized that I had different slides for these things, but okay, but this is more specific, so I'll just stick to these very points. When we look at sustainable food systems, what are the policy changes that we would like to see? We really need to invest in building resilience. And this just doesn't mean, esoteric agriculture that unfortunately has become esoteric, that tribal communities are still practicing. We really need to work on the way we work on seeds. What are the characteristics that we select in our seeds? What are our agronomical practices? How are we doing that? And most importantly, resilience comes only when the consumer is educated that you cannot have tomato and capsicum throughout the year, or even onions for that matter, potatoes, onions. These are all seasonal crops whose seasonality have a role in their local ecology. When we make them all season crops, I mean, cauliflower, radish, cucumbers, watermelons, these are all becoming all season crops today. But almost everyone recognizes, इसमें स्वाद नहीं है, मजा ही नहीं आता है इसमें. And of course, those in the US and Europe, bananas, and I mean, banana everywhere, but even mangoes have become all season. Kiwi, I mean, take any fruit, vegetable that has been successful in the market and it's made into an all season. So consumers need to be educated that no, just because you can do it doesn't mean you do it. So yeah, and there's a demand, there are people who are ready to supply for that demand. The other important thing when it comes to policy changes is that we really need to change okay, I'm just getting a message that my connection is unstable. So just give me a second. I'll just, how do I get out of the screen? I just disable my video.
We don't have any trouble hearing you.
Okay, yeah, I just disabled my video because I want to preempt any loss of connection. So just bear with me for a few minutes before till I re-enable it later. So there's a disproportionate focus on yield in our perspectives on agriculture, in our asks of agricultural fields, agricultural production. And we really need to reduce that. We need to divert our energies and attentions towards resilience, towards building a better sustainable system, rather than looking at an infinite increase, which is utterly impossible, and it's a nuisance. Any economist will, or any sensible person will agree that you can't keep growing forever. So what does it mean when we have an economic paradigm where we are just looking to increase yield year on year? So we really need to change that. And of course, we have to work at the policy level in building shorter and more transparent supply chains. I won't get into that too much here because it's a management issue, and I don't think Sitara people would be too interested in management issues. There are other changes we need. We really need institutional changes, because all these changes don't come about in vacuum, whether it is in policy or in consumer behavior. We really need to work on our research aspects, our research problems, how we are defining our research problems. Do we just keep looking for the latest and greatest in terms of yield, or do we look at other aspects as well? And in terms of converting that research into technology, like I was mentioning, processing is a major challenge even today. And we really need some good brains working on and cracking these problems. And needless to say, the economics is totally messed up of our food system. And the more we can work on it, and there are quite a few people who are starting to work on this aspect, and I really look forward to some of the new things coming up when it comes to moving towards sustainable food systems. But I typically don't stop there, because there's also a personal angle, and that is about how we look at our diets. We can, if we are resourceful enough, if we are rich enough, we can always move to a paleo diet or a keto diet or some other such quote unquote fancy diet. But what we have to recognize is that not everyone can do that. And what really is affecting today's food system is the buying powers of the resourceful. And we want our zucchini or our bell peppers or our tomatoes or our various other things uh, the same way that I get it during season. We really have to work on that in order to change this reality and make this into more of a conscious eating kind of diet, rather than just a me, my body, and myself, or me, my family, and myself. So yeah, that's very important in terms of moving towards a sustainable food system. It's about equity. It's not just about health, as in individual health, personal health, and the value of food. Now, we really need to think, what is the value of food as society? There is a lack of appreciation at a personal level of whether people have a right to food. Because if we all agree that everyone has a right to live and therefore a right to food, why is it that we are pricing food by a market? Neither the producer nor the consumer sets the price of these commodities. Who is setting them? It's the market that's setting them, which is not involved in either producing it nor in consuming it. So it's not the one who's deriving the benefits of the nutrition, nor the one who's quote unquote putting the nutrition in it. So, in some sense, we really have lost our way when it comes to how we look at food and how we value food. So, when I say value food, I don't mean to say don't waste food.
Can anyone hear the speaker? Because I can't hear him. Maybe we lost him.
Yeah, we can't hear him.
Maybe we can
Sorry,
request
I
him
got
to put off his video. Yeah.
Yeah, I
think
just
better.
did that. I reconnected and turned off my video. Thank you for that valuable suggestion. I should be doing that, and I just did that. So coming back, I was saying that we really need to look at food beyond my own plate and think of it as a food system, and that is extremely critical when it comes to looking at this. Oh, I need to get the control for changing the slides. I've put a request. If the host can, yeah, thank you very much. Let's see if it's working. Yes, it is. So I'll just summarize and conclude with it here. This is an amazing image that I want to spend a few minutes or a minute on. This is sorghum or jowar. Some of you might have seen it in the fields. And what you see here is the stalk growing up vertical over here with roots being coming out of the nodes as the plant is growing taller and taller. And you can see that there are 3 nodes above the ground from which roots are emerging. And eventually even this 3rd node's roots will hit. And when they hit, they're going to hit at a much wider spot. So we really need to look at how growth happens in nature. I mean, we always think, oh, trees grow in such beautiful fashions, they send out their roots. I mean, these are not tap roots. These are, bushy roots or whatever the other roots are called. But they have evolved ways to stabilize themselves even when they grow 10 feet, 12 feet tall. This particular plant, when I photographed it, was about 8.5 feet tall, and it was ready to grow to, set to grow till about 14 feet or so. So we really need to look at how we are growing. We need to spread and stabilize, draw nutrients, draw ideas, draw solutions. When it comes to machines, process skills, I won't say which node is which one among these points over here, but you can pick which one comes where, but they're all important. And we need to really look for opportunities to develop as, scientists, as researchers, as people at the cutting edge of change. We really need to look beyond the existing structures and start putting out those roots even before we know where it's going to land. We should know the direction, we should have our convictions and move for that. Just to conclude, we really need to learn from mistakes we have made with paddy rice and wheat. And there's nothing wrong in confessing, or actually it's great if we are able to look back and identify our mistakes and improve. And even today, even with all the reviews that have happened in ICAR with regard to the green revolution, I have reviewed some 3 or 4 review studies, documents, and you really don't see the fessing up of these basic mistakes when it comes to developing and identifying what should our food security, where should our food security come from. And we should not just limit ourselves to cereal grains, because food is not just a cereal grain issue. We really have to look at our pulses, our vegetables, our fruits, and most importantly, our uncultivated foods and meats. These are the things that really are the foods of the poor and the oppressed and the marginalized for millennia now. Any literature piece that you look at from any society, the first thing that you will read when you come to food of the peasants, food of the plebeians, whatever you call them, it's that they gathered more than they grew. And in many cases, it's actually told in a very accusatory way, as if these are, somehow subhuman or not developed enough. But if you look at sustainability and if you look at various other aspects in terms of ecology, coexistence, all that, we really need to go beyond cereal grains and look at uncultivated foods, meats, and various other things. And of course, we need to take a systems approach. There have been enough examples of model farms, model solutions for various things, especially on the production side. There has been barely any work on the consumption side. Again, there are some communities, there are some individuals, there are some families that are trying to do sustainable living, but not really something at a societal level. And recent changes in consciousness about the environment and other things are very heartening, but unfortunately, they are still going towards a technology heavy approach rather than looking at what kind of technology do we need. Do we really need fortification, or are there other solutions? Is the problem just limited to nutrition available in paddy alone, or do we look beyond? So I really think that we need to look at it from a systems approach and go beyond these individual broken down problems, pill-sized problems, which are good for our resumes and CVs and research proposals, but really don't cut it when it comes to policy or where we are heading as humanity or humankind. Humanity is probably not the right word there. Anyway, so that's my presentation for today. You can read more of my work on any of these 3 sites, and you can also contact me at the coordinates below anytime. It's not by mistake that I kept the KMW 2020 here. That's a 10 session webinar series we did in a couple of months ago in May. And you can find the entire 10 series material of the entire 10 session webinar series on that website, on that URL. So, and of course the millet.org is another place where you can find material. The presentation itself is shared via Creative Commons CC by license, share alike by license. And if you would like to get something without the proprietary material, please just drop me a message and I would be glad to share that. And I would be happy to answer any questions or welcome any feedback you might have, comments, feedback. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So now we go on to the Q&A session, and you can either raise your hands and we'll let you ask questions in order, or else if you have network issues, you can also put your questions on chat and we can ask him. Thank you. So starting with Naren Shah, sir. Sir, you can ask your question.
Yeah, hi, good evening. So, one of the advantage of Mr. Guru of these online presentations is even before you finish, you can raise your hand. So, so you can put your rumal on the
Of course.
on the handkerchief, I mean to say.
That's
on
great.
the Yeah, so I have just 2 quick questions. One is on your slide number 15. If it is possible for you to go to slide 15. Yeah, so here, for example, when you have a rubric called reduce investment on yield, does that, what you meant was like, do not focus on productivities per se, the conventional productivities as they are understood. Is that what you meant?
Yes, but the issue, see, I mean, the way I understand productivity and yield might be a little different from the formal definition. Productivity still has some perspective on biomass, still has some perspective on what are the other things coming in. Yield is solely focused on what we are able to take out of the farm in terms of the grain that we get from that crop. And this, you're right. I mean, that's what I was trying to say. But the focus is completely on how much can I extract, and it's not even in terms of the classical definition of productivity. I feel I might be a little putting a slant on the definitions here.
So perhaps do you mean, if we understand you by putting this phrase, do you mean lessen your focus on input intensive agriculture. Do you mean that?
100%.
Yeah.
100%. Yes.
Okay. And then the second question and the last question that I have is on slide number 18. If you could kindly go on slide number 18.
Okay.
Is it possible to go on slide
No,
number 18?
I have yielded control of the screen, so I think the host has to.
So slide number
18, 18. Yeah. So here, Dr. Guru, I could not understand your analogy of I mean, like, it was little difficult to comprehend.
Sorry.
What is this? I have never seen such a plant. So where the roots seem to be, I mean, the root system in the air, and if you could kindly sort of throw a little more light as to what this is and why are you linking it to sort of all those other inputs in agriculture like machines, process, skills, supply chain, and economics. So please help me.
Yeah. So so I'm sorry, I probably was a little too fast on this. So this is basically a sorghum or a jowar plant. It's a single plant, and the vertical stalk that you see is the main stalk of the plant. And what you see are these roots. And as the plant grows, more and more of these lower nodes, or what are the nodes close to the collar of the plant, they start pushing out roots, which is what we see in the the one at the bottommost, the visible node there, followed by the next one and the third one. And
so sorry. So have you uprooted it in and then showing, or they already are seen on the top of the soil? Is it above the soil? Okay.
Yeah. I mean, if you think of mechanical structures and how you can stabilize a mechanical structure, right? If you have a flag post and you want to hold, the bigger you want to build it, the wider you want your platform and the more anchor points you want for your flag post, correct? So that's what the plant is doing. What it's doing is that it's finding enough nutrition in the soil that it's growing like mad. And it's not just growing like mad and just growing up. It wants to stay stable. I'm just putting it in a very personal sense, as if it's consciously doing it. Bear my language. I don't mean that. It's just evolved in such a way that those which push out these roots and are able to stabilize themselves even when they are so tall. Like I mentioned, this thing can grow, would have grown to about 14 feet or so. When I saw it, it was about 8 feet. Way taller than me. I mean, my outstretched arm barely, came up to the, the tip of the plant, the apex, but and it was just not yet into flowering, and it was still in its vegetative state. So what I'm trying to say here is that the roots, the roots as they emerge from the nodes, they don't know where they're going to land. They don't know if they're going to get what they are seeking, but they still do that. And actually, there's another thing. Now that I have taken this time, I might as well point this out. If you observe to the right of us as we are seeing the photograph, the roots are not as tall as it is to the left of us, especially from the topmost node that we see. And that's because there is a there's a sahfasal, what do you say? It's a mixed crop, and there is another plant growing on that side. Whereas on this side, and you can see it in the sun and the lighting also, on the left side, as we see the image, on the left side, the roots are growing faster because they know that, they have got the signal that, there's better bounty on this side than on the other side. So what I'm trying to say is that we have to look forward when we look at opportunities for developing machines, process, skills, supply chain, economics, all of these things. We cannot just limit ourselves to the economics of making paddy more viable, or machines that will improve the nutrition retention with paddy and wheat, but rather we really need to look at it in terms of a food system, in terms of sustainability, if we want to achieve sustainability. So sorry if the analogy didn't come across very well. But what I mean is that we really need to set out, just like those roots do when, when there is some promise of better, what shall I say, returns. And millets are offering that, are showing us that, it is possible that we can move towards a more sustainable food system. And it may not be very visible today, but we really need to set out like these roots and explore all these various aspects and, develop them, build the knowledge, build the technologies and the economics in these aspects.
Thank you, Dr. Guru.
Thank you, sir. Now, I request Mr. Srinivas Rao, sir, to please put up your question.
Yes, I have been working with quinoa for the past few years. Just like Dr. Guru, I also have quite a good contact with tribals and millets.
Nice.
The purpose of myself and many people like Dr. Guru is to see that the nutrition levels go up in people, malnutrition come down, and at the same time, sustainability increase. But unfortunately, from my angle, I observed that like the roots on this slide 18, most of us are hanging in the air, but not actually set on the ground to do the right thing. The bottleneck I see is the processing. Millets, when you buy in the supermarkets, the actual cost of the millet is probably less than 20%, around 15%. And the remaining cost is up because of various things. So are there any machines, simple machines that can clean and process and give the grain at a small scale, say 10 kilos per hour, 5 kilos per hour, rather than big factories?
Yeah. Very, very good observation, Srinivas Rao sir. And I completely agree with you that processing is critical. I do not think the price is unjustifiably high. It is high in many cases and the justifications are weak, but I have delved into this in quite a good detail in, I think, the 9th presentation in KMW 2020, No Millets Webinars 2020. So I would encourage you to look at addressing price concerns of consumers in that particular presentation. But briefly speaking, the price concern is primarily a price per kg concern. It's not a price per serving concern. And most people who have had brand retained millets, let me emphasize that, millets which still have their brand on it, what I call as natural millet rice, you would recognize that you would eat much smaller quantities, you would cook even smaller quantities than you would of paddy rice, especially the bleached paddy rice. What I mean by bleached is the polished, what's conventionally called the polished, but I really want to push this idea that it's bleached. So the bleached paddy rice, the cost per serving and the natural millet rice cost per serving are pretty much comparable in the Indian market, the low middle class Indian market. I'm not even talking of the other markets. If you take, what is that, the long grained basmati or some of those rices, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking of the regular lower middle class rice varieties. Even there, we will see that the cost per serving for millets are about the same as cost per serving for bleached paddy rice. So it is an issue. Even there, it's an issue because millets are much less expensive to grow. They cost way less to grow. But the processing of millets to retain the brand is still expensive because, as I mentioned, you need to retain that brand layer and take off that husk layer. So there are millets processing machines which are sensitive to this. There are processes I work with some 5 different organizations in trying to improve this, make this available to larger and larger populations. And we are coming out with a lot of resources. You can keep watching any of those websites, the millet.org, rainfedindia.org, and you will be able to get more information on, as things happen. With regard to not knowing what we need, that's not true. We know that. We know very well how we can retain the brand. We know very well what are the repercussions of, or the fallouts of having that brand on that rice. And that brings me to the fact that the cost is also justified because these are highly pest susceptible and they go rancid much sooner. So if you're familiar with supply chains and pricing, once you have these kinds of limitations, you really, the price increase is not linear. It is sporadic. So what we have is a lot of buffering in our supply chain, and that buffering leads to even more escalation of costs. So, so I agree that the costs should go down, but it's not that right now the middlemen or the middle people in the middle are making a killing. They probably are, because in many cases these are not brand retained grains. These are just lousily processed, bleached millet rice that is available in the market. Again, I have a presentation on how do you recognize the presence of brand. Just check out the millet.org KMW 2020, and you'll be able to find a presentation on that, a discussion on that.
Thank you.
Is it my connection or I have my video off?
Yeah, the slides, we lost the slides.
Yes. So there's a question on the chat asking if we have tried vacuum packing or such packaging alternatives. Yes, I mean, people do use vacuum packing. There's also nitrogen packing that is done, which is much cheaper than vacuum packing and much more practical when it comes to cereal grains, processed cereal grains. But the issue is not just about packaging, right? Because if I buy 1 kilo, and like I was mentioning, the cost per serving is because you are cooking much smaller quantities. So if I'm a family of 3 and I buy 1 kilo, after I open the packet, I have to store it. I would have to invest in vacuum storage, not the kind that I can ask my consumers to do, right? So I would rather process my grains closer to the consumer. And this is what I meant by looking at supply chain and processing in a different way. We really need to split our processing. Today, the entire processing from grain to rice happens in one spot at one time. And, it comes from a farmer far away. It gets aggregated from producers in many places, comes to this processing center, and then goes out to consumers far away, distributing over many months and miles. So we really need to look at how we can change that paradigm. And because as long as the grains are within the husk is retained, these grains are amazingly pest resistant. It's only when the grains are, the husk is broken that we have pest infestation. So this idea of vacuum packing will help the bottom line of the traders and the retailers, but it won't really help the ecosystem of millet supply chain or the millets ecosystem, because it's a short-term solution. In the most commercial of areas in Bangalore, where nobody is processing any grain whatsoever, we did this trial about 5 years ago. And we just kept rice with its brand retained in cups, and each day we would seal up one packet, a cup from one or the rice from one of the cups in a separate packet and date it. By the third day, we had infestation. And this is in MG Road in Bangalore. I mean, if any of you are familiar with Bangalore, it's like, I don't know, what's the equivalent, Marine Drive in Mumbai. I'm not very familiar with Mumbai, but bear with me. I mean, you know, one of the rich commercial only areas. So in somebody's house, if you're eating millets on a regular basis, I will assure you, you have, and that too brand retained millets, you have a local population. You keep any grain for more than 3 or 5 days in an open container, you will have infestation. You keep it in a closed container, you probably can save it for a few months, not more than that. And a kg will last at least a month. And the reason I'm saying it will last at least a month is that we want people to increase their diversity. We don't want them to just say, oh, I'll have you know, foxtail millet the entire week and I'll finish that. That's not nutrition. Nutrition, as you could see in the chart, is all over the place, and we want agrobiodiversity. We want to nurture diversity. We want to nurture resilience. So we really can do a lot better than vacuum packaging, I feel, or nitrogen filling. But if these are the solutions that will take us to a better place, in a better direction, I don't mind. But what's happening is that we are getting stuck at vacuum packaging and nitrogen packing and better labeling and stuff like that, and not really questioning the core premise of our supply chain. And we really need to think in terms of equity, access, and justice. And that's why I emphasize, I mean, I think in the 20 slides, of which about 14 slides are content, I think 3 slides are heavily focused on these aspects, and that's not by accident. As people working on technology, on science, on research, we really need to ground our work a lot more in equity, access, and justice.
Okay, we have a question from Manjunatha.
Good evening, sir. Sir, my question is somewhat related to the Srinivas Rao sir question. So it's about the small scale technology machines which are available in the field now. How you actually really satisfied with that? So this is my first question. And what can the the plus point in those small scale technologies if we bring something in that? So this is related to the question on machines. And if we come to the economics, business model is running in the field now currently, like supplying it to Anganwadis or like that. You saw anyway these 2 questions.
Manjunath, I heard the first one and the third one. The second one was not clear. If you can type it out while I answer those 2, I would appreciate that. So am I happy with the machines that are there? No, not at all. Do I think that is the limiting factor in today's bottlenecks in our supply chain? Again, no, not at all. What is really problematic today in terms of what needs to be done in order to improve our millets value chain, our access to millets, is this aspect of skills. How do we identify this grain is good or not good? We have, that's our primary issue today, that we are not able to, we have a lot of people in our supply chain who are not able to, including our consumers, by the way, and starting from the producer, who are not able to recognize what is quality and where they should do what. And that's why I put skills in this slide, because there's a lot of work that needs to be done. Even with the existing machines, we can get a lot better because of our process is messed up. The people who are making these machines, as you can very well imagine, because cleaning and hulling are 2 different operations, we should not be looking to get one grand machine which will do everything, but rather machines which do one particular job well and in an efficient way. So we have our process messed up. 99% of the processing facilities, put the cart before the horse, and they can still run, but it's extremely inefficient. And many a time the horse gets hurt, and I literally mean it. I mean it literally, because many of those machines are getting damaged, and our products are getting damaged because of this, the cart before the horse. So that's one. Three, I don't see the question 2 yet on the chat, but if you can again type that out, I would appreciate that, Manjunath.
Yeah.
Question number 3 was, right now there are some welfare schemes in which millets are being made available through ICDS, I shouldn't say schemes, but rather departments, state departments, private organizations, which are making millets available in Anganwadis or in hostels, or even in PDS. Like Orissa has started with PDS, millets in the PDS. Right now they're just doing finger millet, but they're looking to go beyond finger millet. But is that the market? 100% that's the market, because that's huge market. But the decisions are not made at that level. Thankfully, there has been some movement at the central level. NFSM, National Food Security Mission, has recognized that millets need to be worked into the food security mechanisms, and there are some changes that have been initiated. I shouldn't say have been, that were initiated a long time ago, 3 years, 4 years ago, but have kind of lost steam in the last 2-3 years. And I'm appalled at how, even in spite of all the things that we are seeing in society today with regard to the economic conditions or the social conditions, the socio-political conditions, we haven't had any announcement from either the federal, the central, I hate to call it central, it's the union government, or our state governments when it comes to food security related, production related issues. In fact, in Karnataka, we have taken a regressive step where the state government is saying, farmers can sell their land to anybody. Now, I don't want to digress into that aspect, but we really need to look at beyond ICDS, or PDS. But yes, there is a good, there's a good market there, and it's heavily government driven, policy driven, and therefore private players don't necessarily get into that unless they have the in with the political masters. Where we can focus on small scale technology, any 2 or 3 requirements can you mention? Okay, great. Whole bunch of things. Now, millets are small. I showed you some photographs with the scale in that slide, or in that photograph. They are less, about a millimeter. Larger millets are not necessarily better, but about a millimeter and a half is what we can look at. Now, any agro processing machine that you see today, which is in large use at a smaller scale, not in terms of the food grade steel kind of machines, but rather the primary processing machines, the tolerance of those machines itself is in the millimeter range. Now, if I want to keep this rise and take out anything that is smaller than that, my tolerance has to be at least a fraction of a millimeter. Now, how do I achieve that kind of production scale tolerance? Not research scale tolerance, but production scale, machine production, not grain production, but machine production scale tolerance when it comes to agro processing machines, when it comes to millet processing machines. That's a big challenge. Now, Srinivas sir also mentioned, you also mentioned about how I can process at small quantities. Now, there are machines which can process in reasonable quantities with the brand retained at a reasonable scale. But when we talk of cleaning, when we talk of density grading, because essentially we use size and density. These are the 2 handles we have for grain processing, right? Grain cleaning. Yeah. So when it comes to density grading, even today, we are dependent on, the age-old, density graders, which we typically call D-stoners in the industry. Or we have these highfalutin specific gravity separators. What we really need is a low-tech, low-cost density grader, which works on the same principles as our D-stoners, but have much less friction. Because as I mentioned, rancidity increases only when or increases exponentially when you scratch or damage your bran layer. So if you're able to scratch your bran layer less, you will improve your shelf life like bonkers. So I just mentioned two, there are a whole bunch of others. Feel free to message me or check out. I don't think I put these on the website though. Something we are preparing some of these things into a dossier. We'll be hosting that soon, but feel free to contact me and I can share a whole bunch of other challenges when it comes to small scale processing technology.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
I would like to request to be let off in another 10 minutes. So if we can wrap up in 10 minutes, I would appreciate that.
Yeah. Just one last question from Ankur. Ankur, you can place your question.
Yeah.
Am I connected?
Hello. Good evening, sir.
Any response?
Hello. Hello, sir.
What's wrong? I'm connected.
Ankur, maybe just type it also, just in case because it seems like he can't hear us.
Yeah, yes, ma'am. I'll do that.
Sir?
I think he's been disconnected because I don't see his name.
Yeah, it's me.
Yeah, sorry, I'm back. I'm sorry that I lost my connection.
No problem, sir. So Ankur, can you just place your question?
Yeah. Hello. Sir, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Ankur.
Yeah. Sir, so my question is around the consumption side of millets. So currently, even after having so much of awareness, the consumption of millets in our daily food is, I think, still pretty less. So what do you
Correct.
think are the so one factor is the cost that I inquired with my family. So they say that the cost is high, that's why probably they are a little hesitant. Second is the habitual part as well. So what can you what is your suggestion towards this side of the problem, that how do we inculcate more people to consume millets, because this is critical, because once consumption starts, everything else will start falling into place. People will start producing it and all things will happen.
Yes, yes and no. As in, it's not that just because there's consumption and demand, everything will fall in place. Not necessarily true. But the point about price being high, I already touched on this aspect in answering an earlier question. It's really the price per kg and not the price per serving. 1 kg of millets will last me at least 2 times the time a bleached kg of or a kg of bleached paddy rice would last in my house. I'll repeat that. It will last me at least twice as long as bleached paddy rice, which means that I'm not spending twice the money when I buy 1 kg of millet rice at twice the price for 1 kg of bleached rice, because I'm using it for much longer. So what is important is that this is true primarily when the bran is retained. If the bran is gone, this is not true. You would still the economics wouldn't work out that way, because you would still have to use a lot more. Its satiety index is lower. You don't need as much water to cook bleached millet rice as you would when you need to cook natural millet rice, that is one with its bran retained. So and of course this aspect of price concern is real. I'm not trying to say that it's a false concern. No, it's a true concern. But the solution is in working with our consumers, in trying to communicate that, hey, try this out. If you think that you're spending more after 1 month, when you run out of this packet, come back to me and we'll talk about it. But if you just notice how long this thing is going to last and you work out the cost per serving, then come back and buy more. So initially, when I was working with consumers myself, as in selling millets, I worked with some processors, and we had taken up a scheme where we said, you won't pay for the first purchase. You will get it free. But that's only till you come back for the second purchase. When you buy your second purchase, you will pay for the first one as well. That's because you really need to see it yourself, cook it yourself, in order to believe that that is actually the case. I have had people come back and tell me, hey, what do I do with leftovers? Because there's so much cooked millet rice left over for the next day. So, that's because they just cooked it the way they would cook paddy rice, and not just paddy rice, bleached paddy rice. And you really cannot eat that much per meal. So that's where I would start, that let's start working on how we can get people to try these things, one, and two, how can we get brand retained material to the shelves? Not just millet rice, because any millet rice is not brand retained millet rice, just the same way that any paddy rice is not brand retained paddy rice. Most paddy rice is bleached paddy rice in the market today, and most millets are bleached millet rice in the market today. So that's where we need to work on, and that's where we can change consumption patterns. And yeah.
Can I ask one small question related to this, the brand issue?
I'll leave the prerogative to the host. I'm not going to moderate the questions.
So is there time or?
Yeah, go ahead, ask.
Yeah, sir. So I was asking, sir, whether we are focusing on retaining the brand a little too much, because
actually,
if we don't, yes.
I think Dr. Vijay has to leave in like 2 minutes. So
okay.
Maybe we should let him
Yeah.
go.
Okay, so I think Yatin had a question related to that. Maybe you can answer.
Yeah. So I'll quickly answer Yatin's question on the chat. Yes, naked millets are much lower in cost when compared to the processed husked millets. But the nutritive profile is very different. Their resilience are very different. It's a different grain, and they do have the shelf life issue. It's not that these grains are exempt from the shelf life issues. They do have the pest infestation issue. They do have the shelf life issue, and the same supply chain issues that are holding back. The husk grains are also holding back the naked grain millets. Anybody who comes from a family that traditionally uses bajra, jowar, or ragi would know that you store the grains and you take them to the flour mill and use the flour within like 15-20 days at the most, if not even less time. So yes, brand retainment is not as much of an issue with naked grains, because their structures are different and therefore it's not the same. But having said all this, in pursuit of ragi and its benefits, a whole bunch of entrepreneurs and researchers are going towards pearling ragi and making it white, and just like they pearl barley and then they pearl bajra and jowar, now they are out to pearl ragi as well, which is finger millet, and that's just the wrong way to go. But enough of that. I'll just let the host wrap up the session because I need to leave very soon. Thank you.
So before I conclude, I would like to thank you, sir, on behalf of the Sitara family for giving us all your inputs related to millets and the associating aspects and domains to it. So thank you, sir.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity and look forward to any interactions offline. I would welcome with anyone in the larger Sitara family. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
Have a good day.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.